feel so alone, gunning up a big old pile of them bones.
The band Alice in Chains are a prized possession of the 90s that have produced nothing but classic 10 out of 10 perfect albums, one of the most perfect bands that have ever walked the earth. But like every single 90s music act, drugs, controversy, infighting, all of it happened within this band. But no matter what, the legendary guitarist Jerry Cantrell that has led the band throughout the years has shown that no matter who else is in the band, he can still continue on and write some of the best music ever. Yeah, people like me that care way too much about music genres and what they fit into always fight what the hell this band is supposed to be, because they came out with the Seattle scene in the 90s with every other grunge band, but they were much too heavy to be a grunge band. If they had a little bit of prog with odd time signatures, they had the bit of a grunge flair, but they also had a lot of metal, a lot of doom metal, a lot of sludge metal. Now, even though Jerry Cantrell is the heart and soul of this band, it was started by what many people consider to be the heart and soul of this band, Layne Staley, the original vocalist. Layne was originally a drummer, but then switched to singing instead, and he formed the band Alice in Chains. And Layne and Jerry actually became roommates at the time, and then Alice in Chains disbanded. Layne Staley joined a funk band and asked Larry Cantrell to join with him, and Jerry said that he would join as long as Layne Staley would join his band. And Jerry's band included the last two pieces of the original lineup of Alice in Chains, the Alice in Chains that we know. You have Sean Kinney on the drums and Mike Starr on the bass. And after messing with a couple stupid, useless names, Layne Staley eventually decided, hey, let's call this band Alice in Chains. So alternative music wasn't really popular yet, but it was starting to gain its feet. So they were signed immediately, made some demos and all that stuff. But then when Alice in Chains released their first album, them, along with the entire Seattle grunge scene, changed the music landscape for the entire decade. Facelift was released in 1990, and boy does this show off what Alice in Chains can do. And this album ultimately shows why it's really hard to pinpoint them to one genre, because they show off so many different weird things. Well, a lot of the big first singles like We Die Young, Man the Box, Bleed the Freak are heavy classics that are definitely not hair metal, way too heavy for that. But it's also not like a thrash metal or anything. It's actually really catchy. You know, you can tap your foot to it. You can smash a guy's face against the wall to it. But everyone's heard about the first four songs, the hits off this album. You know, they pretty much rigged the first half of this album to be the stereotype that albums are only a bunch of good songs at the start and then a bunch of garbage. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff as it goes along. Once you pass those first four is where the album really starts to experiment. You get to really weird songs that have a very slow tempo, like I Can't Remember, that has a weird brooding atmosphere. And speak about brooding atmosphere, I'd say arguably the best song on this album is the longest song, a song that sounds sinister, especially the way Staley sings. God damn, is this his best vocal performance ever recorded. Love Hate Love is a masterpiece that needs a lot more attention. But then the weirdest song, and one of my other favorites, is another song I must mention, and I cannot believe that this song was not a single because of how catchy it was and how big the Red Hot Chili Peppers were getting at the time. I Know Something About You is a great funk song. And even though this is the early stages of the alternative music scene forming in the 90s, this band was already being groomed for greatness. Even with this first album, the label threw everything they could into making this album. They really had strong faith in this band, and they were already doing huge tours and even did Clash of the Titans after their first album. And unlike every other alternative band at that time that was massively hated by every other metal band that was soon to die out because of the alternative scene, this band was loved by the metal scene. So at that time, before this whole grunge thing became a word, Alice in Chains were a full-on metal band, and they had already an incredible album under their belt. But could they top it?
One who doesn't care is one who shouldn't be. I'm trying to hide myself from what is wrong for me.
To say that 1992's Dirt is a masterpiece is an insult to the greatness of this album. On this album, they go even more experimental and even more heavy, but they really experiment with the songwriting, what they could get away with, what they could make sound weird without sounding jarring. I mean, where the hell do I begin with this incredible smash hit of an album? Them Bones, an incredible hit to start off the album that's downright heavy. Damn That River, another catchy, heavy song. I always loved the song Rain When I Die because it has an absolutely bizarre odd time signature to it. Sick Man, Junkhead, Dirt, Godsmack. Now, one of the coolest songs on here is a song that obviously is inspired by doom metal. A song that I'm so surprised does not have a co-written by Tony Iommi stamp next to it. The Wrathful Angry Chair.
Sitting on an angry chair, angry walls that still hear, stomach hurts and I don't care.
Wood is just about everyone's favorite song on this album, and Down in a Hole is an absolutely stellar song that has maybe Layne Staley's best vocal performance. I don't know, it's hard to decide, but I'd argue that his best vocal performances are the ones that he's doing a lot less of that and a lot more of his actual singing. And this song is nothing but his actual singing voice. Incredible stuff.
I'd like to fly, but my wings have been so high.
You could tell there's one song I forgot to mention. One song that is one of the absolute greatest songs ever written. You know, everyone complains about a song being killed by the radio or hearing it too many times, but for some reason this is one of those songs that I've heard more than 100 times, and it gets better the more I hear it. A song that was dedicated to the soldiers that came back from the Vietnam War. A song that truly provides insight to what they went through when they were in the jungles and the horrible spite that they received when they came back. A song that was based on Jerry Cantrell's father's experience in the Vietnam War. You know, a lot of people will try to say that Wood is the best on this album, but you're absolutely lying to yourself if you think that anything but Rooster is the best song that this band has ever written. Before they released their next album, Alice in Chains would start developing some drug problems. And from this point, their music started to get even weirder, and you could tell that drugs were really starting to get involved, but not in a negative way musically. Before we jump to the next album, the self-titled album, the last one with Layne Staley, we have to talk about their EPs. Now, a lot of people consider Jar of Flies a Alice in Chains album, not a EP, because it's 30 minutes. They could have just as easily made this an album. In fact, it went #1. It has a bunch of hits on it. And a lot of people even consider this their best album, even though it is an EP. It's the most departurous, the most weird. But in many ways, it's also their best. It has some of their most creative songs on it, like Nutshell, hit songs like Don't Follow, No Excuses, and a song that is absolutely grunge, I Stay Away. But for my money, the best song in this entire EP is the first one, the one that took me a very long time to get, a grasp on. I was like, I still don't get why this EP is so loved. But then I really became addicted to that awesome atmosphere of the chorus of Rotten Apple. But this EP is not flawless, I gotta say. Swing on This is a little weird. I like the chorus, it's kind of heavy. The verse is not that great. And then Whale and Wasp, I don't see the point of having a 2.5 minute instrumental that does nothing. But while we're at it, let's talk very, very quickly about 1992. Go back in time, shall we? Sap, another EP that was released that's just about nothing but acoustic material. I mean, it's all right. Easily the best material on here is the first couple songs, like Brother and Got Me Wrong. But god damn, once you get to Love Song, once again, it's an EP. They're experimenting. They're seeing what sticks and what doesn't. Now it's time to delve into their most sinister, dark, angry, and weirdest album that they've ever done. Layne Staley was collapsing from the drug use. The other members were collapsing from drug use. By God, is it a consistent album? I can't even believe it. Usually when bands get disconnected where nobody's working together, usually they produce absolute garbage. It is absolutely insane that this was not a complete failure. And it's weird that they doubled down on the heaviness on this album, because they were getting a lot of pop success off their EP, from songs like Nutshell. You think they would have made a whole album of stuff like that to commercialize off it. We're making the heaviest album we've ever done, and then throwing a couple acoustic songs on there. And the acoustic songs are pretty damn cool. Heaven Beside You and Over Now are really, really nice. Over Now is a little too long. The most interesting thing about these two songs is that they feature Jerry Cantrell on lead vocals.
Be what you wanna be. See what you came to see.
And you really notice that Layne started to fall apart on this album, which is easily the saddest thing about it, because Layne Staley's voice is not very dynamic on here. It's very, very dry, but in like a dark way. It works with the music because the rest of the music's very dark and sinister. But it almost sounds like he wasn't doing that intentionally. Before we go and talk about the tragic deaths, I want to say the absolute best song in this album is the heavy kick-ass God Am. So Jerry just decided to say, well, I guess we're just going to have a hiatus. So for 6 long years, the band had a hiatus. And during this time, Jerry Cantrell actually recorded 2 very successful solo albums that have incredible critical acclaim. And not just from the people that were seeking great alternative albums at the time, they still hold up as great albums. But then in 1998, Layne Staley returned to Alice in Chains, and the band recorded 2 songs, Get Born Again and Died. In 2002, Layne Staley was found dead in his condominium from a fusion of heroin and cocaine. Another interesting little tidbit, though, is that allegedly a lot of Layne's friends claimed that he contracted some sort of virus, like an immune system virus, that helped the drugs pretty much consume him. And then after that point, the band would reunite on and off with different vocalists throughout the years. It was until they performed at VH1's Decades Rock Live. The surviving members did several collaborations with other big names in the music scene, performing old Alice in Chains classics like Rooster, Wood, but the most significant performance is when they did the song Rooster with the vocalist of the band Combs with the Fall. The vocalist's name was William DuVall. The guy did an excellent job of doing Layne Staley's style while mixing a bit of his own. And because of that, he joined the band, and Alice in Chains was once more. So the band reunited with a new bass player though, Mike Inez, and they recorded what many consider one of the absolute greatest comeback albums of all time. Black Gives Way to Blue is so freaking good. It gives this feeling that Jerry was maybe sitting on a lot of this material for years, but it was never released. But I gotta say the best moments vocally, because we do have the new vocalist, William DuVall, are the moments where he's not really copying Layne's style and he's doing his own thing, especially on the chorus of Last of My Kind, one of my favorite songs in the album. And I just love the way it starts. All Secrets Known is such a weird, different song. It's not necessarily anything that we've heard from Alice in Chains before, but it is damn good, especially that chorus. It gives this really incredible atmospheric feel to it. And one big thing that a lot of bands fail to do when they make big comeback albums that ultimately are forgotten in the sands of time is that they forget to make smash hits. This album has 4 of them that are all still played on the radio. Check My Brain sounds like a classic Alice in Chains song. Your Decision, an incredibly famous ballad from this album. A Looking in View, which ended up being a very long epic song in this album. And Lesson Learned, an incredibly catchy song. They were just nailing out of the park with every song on this album.
Feeling like you never could. Then the disconnected frying. If the vein is struck a nerve. Seeing through myself that's blinding.
And that is precisely why Black Gives Way to Blue is not only another incredible album, but it is one of their best albums. And then before Alice in Chains could even release another album, tragedy struck the band's history again, as the original bass player Mike Starr was found dead in 2011. And just like Layne Staley, he died of a drug overdose. But that would not stop the mammoth that is Alice in Chains. And in 2013, they hit with their newest album at this point. What a weird title for an album. The devil put dinosaurs here. But apparently Jerry Cantrell, who is an atheist, says that he actually was inspired by a lot of those weird Christians that think that dinosaurs don't exist, because the Bible apparently doesn't coincide with the existence of dinosaurs. So they think the devil put dinosaurs here to trick us all. More big hits came with this album. Hollow, Stone, Voices. Not as big as Black Gives Way to Blue, and I think everyone can agree that it wasn't as big of a hit as that. But in many ways, this album is actually more consistent than that album. It hits you with a lot more heavy songs in a row. And towards the more beginning end of the album, we get my favorite song on the album, the title track. Even though this album is awesome, though, I do think that the better songs tend to be on the first half of the album. That's because a lot of the ballads are on the second half, but they're very good ballads, very, very poppy, and I'd argue that even though this album goes back to that real heavy roots of the band. It also kind of goes more mainstream than they ever have gone before. And the last song, Choke, is a very, very good example of that. So that wraps up my Alice in Chains discography. A very mainstream band that gets a lot of attention and a lot of critical acclaim. And you know what? They deserve every shred of it. They really do. They are not overrated in the slightest. But before I go, here's my worst to best of Alice in Chains' albums. Thank you guys for watching.
Gonna end up a big old pile.